Travelers, what are some of the scariest experiences you've had abroad? Story one, I was traveling in Nicaragua several years ago when I got lost and ended up having to take a taxi at 9:30 in the evening back to my hostel. When the taxi pulled up to the curb, the taxi driver locked the taxi doors and told me that I had misunderstood the fare. He claimed I owed him $100, which was several times more than we had agreed upon. I tried to pry the doors open from the inside, but was completely trapped. Thankfully, he let me out of the taxi after taking all the money I had on me. The hostel workers told me I was incredibly lucky. A few days earlier, a taxi driver had taken another young female against her will, harmed her, then left her barely conscious in a field outside town thinking that she was no longer alive. A few local school children found her on their way to school in the morning. Story 2, visiting Chicago from Seattle for a week. I booked an Airbnb with a gentleman understanding that I would be in a household with maybe 5 other people, as he did bunk beds in the room. The Airbnb was marketed as close to trains, decent area, and the house looked clean with many useful amenities. Upon arriving at the house, I find that it is run down, unclean, with only the sheets being changed by the maid. On top of that, many appliances were broken, and there was no potable water. That was the first strike. Next, there were upwards of 15 people staying in the house. That bunk bed situation? He had 5 to 6 rooms with varying amounts of bunk beds squeezed in and no room to walk. No one in the house knew about the other rooms from the listing. I dropped my things off to explore the city and noticed the neighborhood was a bit unsettling, but thought nothing of it. When I came back, there was one of the other guests sitting waiting for an online food delivery because he was too terrified to walk down the street and get food. Apparently, the night before I arrived, 3 people in the house were mugged while walking 5 minutes from the train to the house. That night, 8 of us sat on the floor of the living room, which seemed like a small dining area, but a small couch was placed in there with a broken television, and heard 2 separate occasions of 8 to 10 loud sounds a block away. I immediately moved to a hostel and argued with Airbnb and with him until I received a refund. Story 3. I was followed by a guy while walking through the Tiergarten in Berlin. I was walking a path, enjoying the park alone. I saw this guy standing on the edge of the walkway, just looking off into the distance. I passed him, and when I was about 20 feet away, he turned and followed after me, keeping pace. I started to take a very meandering path, even leaving the park and entering again. The guy stuck with me the whole way. Eventually, I got to a place with some sharp turns and heavy greenery. I was able to lose the line of sight and put myself up against a corner. I had just been in Switzerland and had bought a pocket knife, so I opened the blade and held it inside my jacket pocket. I stood there waiting, and then this guy comes walking out of the path confused and obviously trying to see where I went. When he finally spotted me, he jolted, and since I had the drop on him, he played it cool and continued walking as if he had not followed me there. He stopped a little ways ahead, and I kept watching him. I wanted to confront him to find out why he had followed me, but since I was a visitor in the country, I thought better of it. Instead, I waited until I saw a big group of people leaving and fell in with them. He started to follow me, but I finally lost him outside the garden. It unsettled me because to this day I have no idea why he was following me. I am a guy, and at the time I was in my early 20s, pretty fit and had a sour disposition, so I did not seem like a prime target, but maybe he thought otherwise. Story 4. I was walking around in a town in Algeria. I wandered into a neighborhood and noticed there were hardly any people out. A little further, and there were literally no people out. I started to feel a little uneasy. Then I saw an extremely tall man walking towards me, straight towards me, obviously with intent. He got closer, and I saw an older gentleman with a long gray beard and wearing a gray tunic. I stopped. He came right up to me and said, in pretty good English, that I was not safe there and that we needed to get off the street. I agreed, and he told me to follow him. We walked a few blocks, and we came to a door, and he told me to wait there a minute, and he went inside. He opened the door again and invited me in. When I got inside, there were maybe a dozen men. They were all dressed in black, and they were staring intensely at me. Graybeard scolded them, shaking his fists at them, getting really worked up. Then one of the younger guys went into the kitchen and brought out some tea and cookies and offered them to me. So I was drinking tea and trying to smile, and one of the young guys asked where I was from, and I said the United States. And he started talking about the intelligence agencies and stuff. And then I said that if he thought those agencies were bad there, then I could tell him about Central America. And then pretty soon everybody was warming up to me, and we were laughing and talking about international politics and drinking tea. After a bit of that, the older man invited me back to his apartment. He had a huge library. I gifted him a book that I had finished. Then he told me what had just happened. His little brother, who was one of the younger men, was the leader of a radical group, all the other men I had met. He had overheard them getting ready to take me against my will, but he had shamed them for not being good hosts and for disrespecting him because it was his house. He said that I would be safe from then on. Story 5. I was walking to a pharmacy down a busy avenue in Rabat, Morocco. It was the Feast of the King, so most people had off work and school, meaning the avenue was empty. Myself and 2 volunteers, all 3 young white females, were walking and chatting when 2 guys on a motorbike passed us the opposite way. They drove over the median and pulled up beside us. The guy on the back got off and walked toward us, then pulled a machete out from underneath his flannel. Girl 1 threw her purse, girl 2 threw her phone, and both went running. The guy came after me and I wrapped my hand around my purse, which had my passport, wallet, phone, and so on, and he held the machete up to my neck. I said a few strong words to him in Arabic, essentially telling him that what he was doing was shameful in the eyes of Allah, something I had been taught by locals to keep the kids I worked with at an orphanage in line. Machete Man immediately appeared terrified. He went after the dropped phone and purse, and I started running the rest of the way to the pharmacy. I wound up there crying, and the other 2 girls met me. People were starting to gather. Some had witnessed it while driving by, while others were trying to translate for us. A woman said she would drive us home after speaking with the security guard at the pharmacy. We agreed and got into a minivan. I provided directions in Arabic, and the woman drove right past the house, ignoring stop signs and traffic lights. It was then we realized we were about to be taken. One of the 2 girls reached forward, opened the door of the van, and we jumped out while it was moving. Story 6. I was traveling in Costa Rica with 2 flashy businessmen who were there to possibly purchase a gentleman's club. We were staying at the Radisson and asked the concierge to get us a cab to the club. We got in the cab and made sure that the driver knew where we were going. We were told it was a 10-minute drive. About 7 minutes in, I realized that we were not in a touristy part of town at all. The driver was whispering into his phone in Spanish, staring at us in the rearview mirror. I became uneasy and looked at my companions, who were clearly feeling the same way. We asked if we were almost there. Oh yes, one moment. More whispering. Not good. We were being set up. It had been 10 minutes and we were in a concerning residential area. I was sitting in the middle and my partner opened his briefcase and handed me a pen and told me to defend myself if needed. What? He passed another pen to the other man. He was sitting directly behind the driver and took his own gold pen and held it to the driver's neck and screamed to take us back to the Radisson right now. And the partner snatched the driver's phone and hung up. I was just clutching the pen. We did make it back to the Radisson. The jewelry was placed into the safe in the room for the rest of the trip, and we eventually made it safely to the club. I was young and naive. I had had my passport for 3 days at this point and did not really understand that we should not have been traveling there with that amount of flashy jewelry. Story 7. My first night in Canada in 2014, I spent in a cheap hotel in Montreal. Pretty standard cheap hotel situation. The place smelled of smoke, and I could hear people making noise in the other rooms. Whatever, the place had an ensuite, free wireless internet, and a television, and I had been traveling all day. While I was sleeping, the bathroom door opened and the light switched on. I was too scared to get up and confront the person. Besides, I was sleeping without clothes and I did not want to unpack my pajamas since I was continuing on to Quebec City the next day. Through half-closed eyes, I could see a person standing in the door of the ensuite facing towards me. They stood there for about 25 seconds. Then the light switched off and they disappeared. I checked my phone and it was about 2 in the morning and somehow I fell back asleep. The next morning I checked out and got out of there, never mentioning it to anyone. There was a door from the corridor to the ensuite, but it looked like it had been blocked off, as though maybe there had been a cupboard there and the bathroom built over the top. It definitely did not look like the kind of door someone would use for normal access. It was about 1/4 the size of a regular door. I never understood why someone would enter through there into an occupied room. Story 8. When I was in high school, I spent the summer on an exchange program in China with my best friend at the time, both female. The program was kind of lax and had kids from all over the world, and they definitely did not keep a very close watch on us. One day we went to a shopping mall, and these two cute, unintimidating Chinese girls, maybe in their late teens or early 20s, came up and asked if we wanted to go with them to hang out or something. I thought it was kind of weird, but my friend was really excited by it. I think she wanted to meet locals and get more of a sense of the culture, and these girls seemed so sweet and innocent. They led us through the mall and outside on the street, and the whole time the hair on the back of my neck was standing up. I knew something horrible was about to happen, and I finally stopped my friend, who also looked kind of unsettled. We told the girls never mind and ran back to the mall. They looked disappointed but did not try to stop us or anything, which at the time made me feel like maybe they did not have bad intentions. Now that I am older and understand more about how the world works, I am pretty much positive we were minutes away from becoming victims of human trafficking. It is honestly the closest I feel I have ever come in my life to being in life, threatening danger. I still think about it a lot. Story 9. I was in Iceland and was driving around the ring road with a friend. We stopped for the night at a big cabin called the Lambafell Hotel. I had a horrible nightmare while staying there that I was being pulled underwater in some strange Icelandic lake. It was one of those really realistic dreams that caused me to jump up, gasping for breath. Anyway, we continued the drive the next day, but my friend insisted on stopping and hiking up a beautiful waterfall called Sisterfoss. We pulled over and hiked up to its water source, which was a lake exactly like the one in my nightmare. I mentioned that I had a terrible dream about this same lake. We got close to the water's edge and saw a sign that told the history of the lake. It explained how a medieval monastery used to be there and was moved after nuns kept going missing in the lake as they bathed. An eyewitness of the time said she saw a hand offering golden shoes to the nuns and then pulling them under once they got close enough. The lake was called Sistervatten. I had the same exact nightmare again at the next stop. I just wanted to get as far away from that island as possible after that. Story 10. I was backpacking through Southeast Asia this year and ended up in a nightclub in Vietnam. Now, if you have ever backpacked Vietnam, you would know that most people follow the same route, so you bump into a lot of the same people along the way. This particular night, I did not even want to go out, but a girl I was traveling with met a bunch of guys we had met a few weeks prior in a different city, and we said, forget it, we would all go out for a few drinks just in case we never saw each other again. Catching up, talking, having a good time, and suddenly it is 4 in the morning, and I am about 10 kilometers from my hostel. Cool, I will order a ride from my phone, basically the equivalent of a car service app in Asia. No drivers at that time. Okay, I will go to the bar and ask for a taxi company to pick me up. They did not have any numbers for me to call. So here I am, a pale blonde, 5'3" girl, drunk in the street at 4 in the morning in Hoi An with my equally drunk, pale blonde friend. We knew it was too far to walk and too dangerous. There were not any other backpackers left in the area, so we did not know what to do. A group of Vietnamese men on motorbikes pulled up and asked us if we needed a lift home. They were obviously not taxi drivers and had a very unsettling vibe about them, but we did not know what else to do, so we negotiated a price and got on the back of the bikes. Fortunately, they did drive us to our hostel, but then they tried to rob us while dropping us off. I did not even realize it at first when the driver reached over and took my money out of my waist pack. I was just upset at him for taking the wrong amount. Without even thinking about what I was doing, I grabbed my money back out of his hands and a yelling match started with all 4 of the guys coming at me and my friend while shouting at us in a mix of English and Vietnamese. They were getting aggressive, saying how we owed them. Thankfully, our hostel had security. They heard the yelling and immediately ran outside to us. The men took off on their bikes pretty quickly, only getting the money I had agreed to pay. The security staff were awesome and very kind. They warned us how people get hurt from fake taxi services and to be careful next time. I am super thankful they were there and honestly cannot believe how careless we were that night. Story 11. My mom was on a mission trip to El Salvador in the late 1980s, and her group decided to stop by a small seaside village for sightseeing. The village seemed deserted, but they did not think it was unusual since it was early Sunday morning and most Salvadorans would be in church. When my mom's group tried to approach the cliff overlooking the ocean, they were stopped by armed soldiers who told them that the cliff was unstable, despite the Salvadoran soldiers parking their jeep on it. After they had left, they were relaxing on the opposite side of the large cove, about a mile away, when one of the missionaries decided to pull out some binoculars to take a look at the cliff they were just at. That is when it hit them that the villagers were not in church at all. They were in a pile, no longer alive, at the bottom of the cliff. The army had rounded up the entire village and ended their lives. They were trying to cover up an atrocity. Another time on that same trip, the army took one of the missionaries from the hostel. He was a Hispanic man with long hair, which was characteristic of the local insurgents. He was harmed and beaten for 3 days until the army returned him to the missionary hostel. Story 12. Husband had a month-long job in Japan. We joined him for the last week of his work. My daughter and I had made reservations about 2 months ahead of the trip to go to the Ghibli Museum in Mitaka, an hour by train outside of Tokyo. Since we did not know my husband's work schedule, we only got tickets for her and me. We found out last minute that he had the day off, so he came with us. They managed to find him a ticket, and he joined us. We left earlier than planned because he had to get back for a 5 o'clock call. We would continue on up to Harajuku after his subway stop. 2 stops before we would have parted ways, the train came to an immediate stop and frantic Japanese came over the speaker. Shortly after that, the car started rocking, and kept rocking, and kept rocking, for about 10 minutes. My husband said he realized it was bad when he saw people taking out their phones and starting to text, something you never saw on the subway. After half an hour, the car slowly crawled to the next station. A friendly English-speaking woman informed us that there had been a severe earthquake and the trains were shutting down. We walked the 2 miles back to the hotel and met up with the rest of his crew. We had to stay in the lobby for 8 hours while maintenance checked the building for damages before we could go up to our rooms. The aftershocks continued for the next 5 days before we flew back home. We were in the Tokyo subway for the Tohoku earthquake on March 11, 2011. I can honestly say I did not start getting nervous until they started talking about needing to take iodine tablets because of the power plant emissions. And it was not until we were back home and watching all the news specials about the quake and tsunami that I realized how truly dangerous the situation had been. Midwestern lack of experience with earthquakes saved our trip, I guess. Story 13, I was in a hostel in England. It was late night at the bar and lots of people were hanging around. There were 2 guys there from Eastern Europe, both big guys, very intimidating. They were hitting on the girls working there. It got to the point where they were drunk and touching them inappropriately. Things were escalating, and the girls were clearly not okay and needed help. So now it is 1 in the morning. 2 female bartenders being harassed badly by these guys. Probably 8 other people in the bar, 5 guys, and together we probably weighed as much as the 2 men. We decided we had to act. One of us stood up and told them they had to go. The other 4 of us were holding our beer bottles by the neck, ready to use them as weapons, and the men stood up. This was probably the most scared I have ever been. I was ready to defend myself but did not want to be in this situation. Thank goodness the guys started yelling in another language and walked out. The girls locked the door immediately and thanked us. We all hung out a couple of hours drinking free beer and tried to calm down. In hindsight, I am glad I had the experience. One of the girls there is still a good friend of mine. That kind of situation can bond people, I guess. Story 14, I went on a European vacation with my folks to meet up with my brother and his family who were living in Belgium at the time. My dad is a little meticulous. He will read every single book about a destination and constantly harp on what he sees as the important details. As our next destination was Paris, he would not stop warning us that the train stations are thick with thieves and pickpockets. Now, a little backstory is required. I am American, but look very Slavic, and at the time, everything I wore was shoddy, ill-fitting thrift store clothes. I got off the train first, carrying my nephew's stroller, and was walking by myself about 10 paces ahead of the rest of my family. As I got off the train at Gare du Nord, with endless warnings of pickpockets dancing in my head, I saw 2 rough-looking guys in street clothes watching the crowd and we kind of locked eyes, at which point they nodded at each other. Next thing I know, they have flanked me from behind from each side and cut me off. The more imposing of the two puts his arm up in a halt gesture, and that is when I notice he has a gun in a shoulder holster. Oh no, I thought. The man starts talking rapidly in French, but I am an American with no understanding of the language, so I have no idea what he is saying. I tell him I am an American tourist, and he asks for my passport in English, and that is when the relative chaos starts. My dad saw what was happening and walked up behind me, put his hand on my back, and pushed me past the men. The man with the gun grabs my arm and I yank it away, saying something along the lines of, "What are you doing?" And now my entire family is there backing me up and in a panic. The man with the gun is obviously worked up by all this and asks for my passport again, and I tell him no, he is not getting my passport. I will never forget the utterly perplexed look on his face as my father and I start arguing with him. He says he is police, and my dad and I both tell him we do not believe him. He insists, and I ask for his identification, at which point he pulls out some cheap colored armband. I respond with, "That means nothing to me, and you are not getting my passport." Mind you, the entire time we are arguing on the train platform, I am waiting for him to pull his gun. Finally, he pulls out a typical badge and identification card. Satisfied and greatly relieved, I produce my passport and am quickly cleared and instructed that in the future, the armband means police. They send us on our way, and I realize that I totally blew their cover as plainclothes officers patrolling the train station. Cut to leaving Paris to go to Switzerland. The train stops, and I see two uniformed gendarmes and a man in an overcoat moving through the train. Great, I think, as I see them immediately zero in on me and absolutely no one else. So I pull my passport out, and as soon as they approach me, I say I am an American tourist traveling with my family, gesturing towards them, and here is my passport. They were obviously surprised by my immediate brevity and barely glance at the passport before thanking me, wishing us safe travels, and continuing down the aisle. So all I can think is that there is or was, at that time, a serious problem with Eastern European criminals coming to France to cause trouble, and that I am a perfect match for the type. Either way, I spent a tense 30 seconds thinking I was going to get robbed and possibly harmed on a crowded train platform in Paris. In retrospect, I partly blame my dad for filling our heads with paranoid stories of pickpockets. Also, as an American white guy, it was an interesting experience to be profiled by the police twice in a 48-hour period. Story 15. A few years back, 2001 I believe, I was eating with friends at a restaurant in Bali. It was about 10 at night and we had had a long day of travel and surfing. We were enjoying sharing our personal stories over some fresh seafood when we started noticing a couple of men walking up and down the street with white robes and big swords. One of them made the restaurant owner turn off all the lights in the building, and then more and more of the robed men with shiny metal started showing up. It was getting frantic as they ran from place to place, getting all the lighting shut down. Even breaking windows to get into the locked stores whose owners had gone home for the day. Cars were herded off the road and we were told not to drive, or we could be harmed. People were talking of animals being used in rituals and spirit gods on the loose. It was a 15-minute drive from our rooms and we only knew one way there. Now we were brainstorming on our best course of action, which turned out to be start walking and see if we could find it. Even in a city, it gets very dark when the lights are out. The place we were staying at was typical Balinese style with a swimming pool in the middle that had a temple built into it. It was our second night in Bali, and we were looking into a nicer place to stay for the rest of the trip, but it was clean, and right now I just wanted to be there. I kept scanning my memory, trying to imagine a route that we could use to walk home. Climbing fences and crossing dark fields were in that plan. We were scared but ready for the adventure that we were facing, and slowly, vigilantly, we walked down the sidewalk. Then a familiar face. It was Wyan, the westernized local guy who helped us get our rental car. He told us that indeed the spirit of Kali had to find a new mask, which meant goats and chickens were being used in the streets. Also, no electricity, cars included, could be used. He did not want us to leave the rental car at the restaurant, so he said he would drive us home in our car. Lucky for us. We hopped in the car, and with the adrenaline running from our change of fate, he began driving with no lights on. He said we could go around the happenings, around the island. But Wyan did not buy into the local religion's beliefs and decided we could drive straight through past the men with swords. I was scared again. They stopped our car. Wyan had some words with the armed men, and then he pressed the gas. The four-cylinder microsport utility vehicle loaded with a group of Americans could not move faster than the men could run. They surrounded the car and started pounding on it. The car was exploding with screams when it gained enough speed to break free. That was it. We all made it out alive. Later I asked how often that happens. When was the last time Kaylee needed a new mask? Never in my lifetime, was the old man's response. Since then, I have never really found out what happened. I had asked a few people we met while we were there and never got complete answers. Searching online does not come up with anything either. Story 16. I was sitting on a beach in Playa del Carmen. The area was not too far from nearby hotels, but it was far enough that there were not any people near me. I went there for some alone time in the early morning, basically, and I was so close to deeply regretting it. I was sitting further from the shore, getting some sun while scrolling through my phone, when I saw a guy walking right by the water. He kept glancing at me as he passed by, then turned back and up toward where I was sitting. I tried to disregard it and kept looking at my phone. He came up and in Spanish said, "Hey, so pretty and so alone, do you happen to have the time?" I told him I did not, though I clearly had the phone in my hand, and gave him a tight smile. He said okay, but still would not leave. Soon I heard someone yell, "Hey," and my name from my left, and I turned to see someone running toward me smiling. It was a guy I had met and spoken to briefly maybe 4 hours earlier while I was walking downtown. I smiled and greeted him back, and by the time he got to where I was sitting, the other guy was gone. But we still saw him turn into an alley between a hotel and an overgrown field of grass and trees. He was with two other men who did not look too friendly, to say the least. I was beyond grateful the guy I had met earlier showed up by chance, because the alley was close enough to me but far enough from everyone else within sight that I could have gotten pulled there without notice. Story 17. Mine was not abroad. We were traveling from Kingman, Arizona to Tucson, Arizona. The car broke down and we were lucky enough to be able to get off the freeway and into a parking lot of a store in the middle of nowhere. The building was a rundown place with "Nowhere, Arizona" painted on the side. It was the middle of the day at this point, but I was afraid. I told my friend that this was like some House of 1,000 Corpses situation. She was trying to get service on her phone, and there was nothing. Then two unsettling-looking men who looked like they might harm people came out from around the building. I swear I had never felt so cold. They came to the driver's side and asked what was going on. We explained that the car had broken down and one man asked to pop the hood. The other man went into the building. He came back out with a toolbox and sealed snacks for us and the kids we had in the back seat. They fixed our car for free and sent us on our way. We could not thank them enough, and we tipped them what we could. Several miles away, the car broke again. We had service and were stuck on the side of the highway, so we called my mom to come get us. It was starting to get dark now, and a big truck pulled up behind us and two men got out. Same men. They fixed it again and sent us on our way. We started driving and called my mom to update her. We got home safely and never saw the men again. That was seriously wild, and 2 times I thought we were going to die, and 2 times those men taught me not to be a judgmental person. Story 18. I was in Amsterdam's red light district one night, in a more secluded and less touristy area than the main streets. Myself and 3 others were standing next to a building, just having a smoke and observing our surroundings. There were a few small groups of 2 to 4 people scattered around the area. All appeared to be older Russian men. A man came running out of a building across from us, yelling that he had been robbed and to call the police. And he kept running, knees high, further and further away. It felt like we were on a movie set. It did not seem real at all. This scene caught the attention of the few groups standing around, and out of nowhere, this big, muscular man rolled up quickly on a moped. He also appeared to be Russian and was dressed in leather attire with big silver earrings and a stern look on his face. Off his moped jumped a tiny, scrappy-looking dog, also with a leather vest on. The man looked around, looked at us, made intense eye contact, and went into the building the man had run out of. At this point, my friends were saying, maybe we should leave, and I said no. We were cool. We were not doing anything. Let us hang back. The random groups of men all started moving around us and closer in, and at that point I said, all right, let us go. They were certainly intimidating us to leave, and seemed to be all part of whatever was going on in the building around us. It all felt very surreal, but when we were leaving the area, I started thinking about what sort of ways that situation could have escalated, and we would have been out of luck, especially given the isolated area we seemed to be in. Story 19. Rented a car for a 2-week vacation in Peru, driving from Lima down the coast and up to Arequipa, Puno, Cusco, and then back to Lima. This was 8 years ago when flooding had stranded a bunch of people on top of Machu Picchu and washed away a lot of roads. The trip itself was a bit harrowing to begin with. Foreign country, small Renault driving through mountains, and was with my now ex-then boyfriend and his 3 kids. It was a long trip, but also pretty amazing. Not having a tour guide let us stop where we wanted to and see some beautiful places. The worst was after seeing Machu Picchu after it had just reopened, we had to get back to Nazca. There is a more direct route versus backtracking that whole way, but we were getting conflicting information whether it was open or not. The most reliable information we got was that the road was being blasted, but at 9 in the morning it would be open for an hour, so we could get through in a little city called Abancay. We got there early and there was indeed a road closed sign and a couple of cars lined up. We parked in the line and got some breakfast. At just after 9 in the morning, the road was opened up and we were part of a caravan running a pockmarked road to get through before it was closed again. It was slow going. By the time we got through, it was a couple of hours longer than we had scheduled for. Back on the real road, the sun began to set as we went through the mountainous roads. No lights except the ones on the car. The stars were brilliant, and I remember pulling off to see them. We all piled back in the car, and one by one, everyone fell asleep. We were about 1.5 hours to Puquio, a large city but pretty much ignored by all of the tour guidebooks we had. Late at night, driving with just the car on the road in the mountains, it started to feel like the road was repeating itself. There was a stretch of about an hour where I felt like I might just be driving in a circle and woke up my then boyfriend. He pulled up the GPS and saw that we were closing in on Puquio. There is a reason Puquio is not in many tour books. There is not much there. But we ended up finding a restaurant open late and asked if there were any hotels in town. There were 2. He recommended the one next door as they also had a locked car park. Upon checking in, the woman in the room next to the front desk was letting her previous client out while bringing the new one in. We made eye contact. The rooms were cheap and the clerk gave us keys while she escorted my boyfriend to the car park a block away while we took our bags up to the rooms. When we were up in the room, one of his kids opened the window to get some fresh air. That is when we heard a car door slam, gunfire, followed by screaming and fighting. Let me step out of this story and say that no one knew where we were. We had no phone, there was no internet, and I was alone with 3 kids who were now frightened, and I was too. If something happened to my boyfriend, I had no idea how I was getting everyone home. He had all of the passports on him. 30 minutes passed. An hour passed. A knock on the door. I opened it and there was my boyfriend. He had ended up chatting with the owner and did not give it a second thought after hearing the gunshot since it happened outside of the hotel and he had just gotten back. Needless to say, we got back to Nazca the next morning and Lima the following day. It was not the only reason I became single after that, but it sure was a part of it. Story 20, Chef Chaouen, Morocco. Beautiful blue city, but with some pretty serious, unsettling hashish capital undertones. Our daytime bus got delayed for several hours, so we arrived almost near midnight. The bus station is a ways down the hill from the town and hotel we were staying at. No phone service, poor lighting, and the only other 2 travelers on the bus were 2 tall Dutch men, also with their lives on their backs. We figured we would stick close to them and walk, as they were bigger, younger, and stronger. After we got off the bus, several shady people started harassing us about rides, substances, and so on. The Dutch men started running. We followed behind them and made it to a store. We explained in bad Arabic and English that we needed a taxi. They understood, and 5 minutes later, what seemed like the Libyans from a famous movie pulled up in a beat-up Volkswagen van containing 3 men and a mattress. We tried to politely say no and insisted we needed an actual taxi. 5 minutes later, an old Mercedes that did say taxi on it pulled up. Relieved, we got in, gave him our hotel name, and he started driving, only 30 seconds later to pull over and talk to the men in the van, who then started following us. 99% sure my girlfriend and I were about to be robbed and harmed on top of a mountain by hash dealers. We pulled up to the base of our hotel. Relieved, I started thinking I completely misjudged these men, and it was just my Western biases playing out. I went to pay the driver, and he shook my hand firmly and with something else. It was a small brick of hash, and he said 500, 500. I already had 200 dirham to pay him for the ride, so I just shoved that back at him, pretended to drop the hash from his hand, and ran up the hill into our hotel like a squealing little child. Story 21. I was taking the ferry from Dublin to Holyhead by myself in the middle of the night as a pretty 22-year-old American woman, and this unsettling guy heard my accent and would not leave me alone. First, he tried to get me to miss the bus to the ferry to go try an Obama burger from a restaurant down the road. This was in 2011. I told him no thanks, I am vegetarian, and tried to tune him out. He was unkempt, dressed strangely, and acting like he was a bit off, so I tried to avoid him. Then he followed me onto the ferry. I should note this ferry is used mostly by truck drivers, but I was a poor backpacker. I had been hoping to sleep on the ferry, but this guy would not leave me alone. There was something about him that felt wrong, and his overall presence scared me badly. He started talking about how his cat had ended its life because of transcendental psychosis and how that could happen to anyone. Then, despite not even knowing my name, he decided to tell me he loved me and could tell we were destined to be together. Fortunately, some Irish truck drivers realized what was going on and stepped in, inviting me to their table for a drink and telling the man to get lost. Unfortunately, that was not the end. When you get to Holyhead, the ferry drops you literally at the train station. It was 3 in the morning. There were a few people there, but I had to wait until 6 in the morning to get my train. Good news though, I had lied and told the man I was going back to London for my studies, when in reality I was meeting friends in Glasgow and not going back for another week. B, he told me he was taking the 5 in the morning train to Bristol or somewhere near there. So I spent the next 3 hours using all my minutes calling every person back in the States I knew. 6 rolled around and I got on my train, and guess who I saw following me on? The same strange cat man. Fortunately, the conductor was already in my car, so I quickly told him I was being harassed and followed and asked for help. When the conductor saw the man coming into my car, he went up to him, told him the back half of the train was closed, and took him to the opposite end. The train made several stops between Holyhead and Glasgow, and I did not see him when I got off. I had never mentioned Scotland to him, so I do not think he thought I would travel that far. To this day, I am pretty sure the truckers, who watched over me so I could get some sleep, and that train conductor saved my life. That man was unstable. A few weeks later, I was in York, where there was a murderer running around, and I was 100% convinced it was that guy. I slept on the floor of my friend's hotel room because I was too scared to be alone. Story 22. Landed in Los Angeles for the first time ever in the United States. I am from Ireland, so everything was new to me. When we got off the plane, my friend who was supposed to pick me up had his tires being replaced and could not pick us up, so we were pretty much stuck and confused on what to do. We did not want to pay for a taxi because our destination was far, and taxis where we are from can be expensive, so we thought it would be worse there. And this is where it gets bad. A short Arabian man approached us and said he was with a ride service and would give us a cheap ride, and asked our destination. We instantly agreed and headed off as he took our bags to his car. We had never taken such a service before ever, and I shortly found out after that you do not pay for these rides with cash, which he demanded 10 minutes into the drive. We were on the highway at this stage. I should add we do not have that ride service in Ireland. Well, we do in the capital, not in my part of the country whatsoever. I kept glancing at his phone that he had hooked up to a mount, and the application he used looked a bit off and unprofessional. It is the best way I could describe it. So I started to get weirded out when he started talking about how he wanted to be intimate with the woman whose voice is used for a certain digital assistant. I knew something was wrong. I was in the front and my friend was in the back, and I had no idea if he thought this was as strange as I thought it was, so I passed him my phone and said he had a text from his girlfriend. But I had typed that I was freaked out and that we might have been kidnapped or scammed. The man suddenly got suspicious of what was going on and demanded to see the messages, then told us that if we did not give him $300 cash up front, right then he was not letting us out, so we paid him foolishly. He started calling people and speaking a completely different language, but he was using headphones so we could not hear anything from the other side of the phone. Panicking, I told him to pull us over and let us out of the car, and I threatened to defend myself otherwise. He got furious at me and started telling me to apologize. So I did and pretended that I was joking. Shortly after, I played it cool with him and asked him to let us out at this random gas station, and my friend and I had no idea where we were. He let us out, and while he took our bags out of his trunk, my friend managed to snap his license plate, and we contacted the police. In the end, it turned out he was driving in circles and was going to charge us a large sum of cash. We ended up getting a taxi with the help of the cashier at the gas station. It was a frightening situation at the time. And who knows, maybe we were not heading to our destination and he was taking us somewhere else or was waiting for someone. Scary to think about. I will definitely be more careful in the future. Story 23, I studied abroad in India for a summer. One night I went for drinks with my fellow students. They all headed home for the evening. I stayed because another few students were on their way to the bar. In the time between, I wandered into a residential alley to be alone. I grew up in United States suburbs, and this is something I do all the time. It is quiet, it is peaceful, it is exploring. Apparently, the neighborhood across the street from the headquarters of my program is not friendly. A man came up to me, grabbed me by the collar, and started to drag me out of the alley. I was not proficient with the local language, but he was yelling angrily in my face. He slapped and hit me in the face a few times. I yelled back, pleading he stop. He picked up a brick from the road and held it as if to strike. When I saw that brick go up, I lost everything that was left of my composure. I started screaming at him, a begging that was several degrees more frantic than the reasonable pleading a few moments before. He dropped the brick and threw me out onto the main road, just a few feet away from the bar's entrance. I sprinted to the door and went inside. The other students were waiting for me at a table. I had obviously been hurt even if I was not in danger anymore. My friends were considerate and made sure I was fine. I held it together until we joined a large group of partying locals. The bar played great music and a certain favorite song of mine came on. I love that song. I felt myself beginning to cry and went outside to the fenced-off smoking area. It was here that I lost my composure and began to sob. Even if it was only a threat, I had almost been hurt seriously for little to no reason. First thing in the morning, I called the head of my program to discuss what happened. As the great community builder she was, she suggested that a few staff members and I go down there to mend fences and make sure no other student got into danger. The residents accused me of urinating on their porches, bicycles, and plants. They did this by yelling at the staff and me. I denied it and was instructed to head back while they worked things out. Eventually, I learned that the alley was popular among local bargoers as a place to relieve themselves. I was mistaken for someone doing that. The end result was the locals agreeing not to lay hands on white people and notifying the headquarters if anything illegal was done. The silver lining was that, as I sobbed in the smoking area, two young men asked if I was all right. I told them my story and they agreed to hang out until I was fine to leave. I will remember their kindness. Story 24, I was visiting Belize City, had left the more tourist-oriented area to get a better idea of everyday life. On the boat tour I had taken earlier in the day, I had heard that Belican was a good beer that I ought to try, so I had an eye out for a local bar that advertised it. Eventually, I found a very small open-air bar with chain-link fencing for walls, a tin roof, and a dirt floor, more of a shack than a bar now that I think of it. I went inside, ordered the beer, and talked to a man whom I figured was the owner of the bar. After a few minutes of casual conversation, the interaction started to get strange. The man told me that he had an issue I might be able to help him with. After trying to get some details and hearing something out of his mouth that sounded like he was going to need some money from me, I began to realize that I might be getting robbed. As an American, I had trouble understanding his accent, so I played the comment off as a misunderstanding while quickly scanning the bar for a quick exit. His body language was becoming more aggressive as the conversation went on. It was at that point that I realized that I was the only tourist in the bar, with no help to look to. At the time, I was a young, maybe 19-year-old kid. My parents were back on the cruise ship and were expecting me back soon. I cut the bar owner off mid-conversation and slipped out the door as fast as possible. While heading quickly back to the cruise port, another shop owner pulled me aside and pointed out that I had an open beer in my hand while walking down the street. I had been in Mexico the day before and had assumed that the open container laws were the same. The shop owner did me a favor and let me know what I was doing was illegal, and I quickly tossed the beer and went on my way and made it back to the ship. Story 25, I went to India through a group at my college. The people in charge of the trip were not actually affiliated with the group very much, but they organized the whole thing. I had had trouble getting in contact with them. My payments had all gone through, but I did not have my plane ticket until about a week before the trip. My ticket was also separate from everyone else because it had been bought late. I flew to India 6 hours earlier than everyone else and by myself. The director of the trip told me he would send all the information I needed through email and that I would have someone there to pick me up at the airport. The day of the trip, I did not know where my hotel was or what it was called. This made it harder than it needed to be to get through customs. After nearly 22 hours of travel, no one was at the airport to get me. I thought I had been scammed. I was stuck in a foreign country where I did not speak the language with no reliable phone or internet. The numbers for the people in charge were not working, and people were staring at me because I was very obviously foreign. I was worried about being kidnapped. I did not know what to do. I thought maybe I should sit there for 6 hours to wait for the big group, but I managed to call my mom. My mom eventually got in contact with the director again, and he told her the hotel. The airport staff arranged a cab for me to get there. Everything ended up fine. There was just terrible communication between the people in charge. I did not really relax until I got to the hotel, and they had my name for a reservation though. Story 26. When I was 20 years old, I did a group trip to Europe with a bunch of students from my college. Arranged by a professor, made quite affordable by group rates and such. Once over there, I broke off for a couple of weeks to do my own thing with a couple of friends. One of those friends was originally from Berlin and had some friends there we could stay with. It was great. The issue was I was 20 and gay and wanting to go dance and meet guys. They were a bit older, lesbian, and had no idea how to accommodate me. So they asked a friend of a friend to take me out on the town, assuring me that he would look out for me as I spoke zero German. Well, the guy shows up and he is twice my age, does not speak a scrap of English, but he has a handy-dandy English and German dictionary. So off we go, in his car driving through Berlin for a good 20 minutes. This was 2002. My old Canadian cell phone did not work either, as roaming was not really a thing yet. It was also May 1st, which is their Labor Day, but is known for violence and unrest in the streets, which would explain the ridiculous amount of police I saw on the way, and a flipped car that was on fire, being dealt with by firemen. So being alone with no language was potentially risky business if I got cold feet and decided to split from this guy. Where does this guy take me? At first I could not figure it out. It did not look like a club. It looked like a big warehouse with one tiny corner illuminated by a bunch of computers. It was an internet cafe. I was trying to ask him what this place was, but he just gestured me to follow and said, "It is okay. It is okay." We got inside and he paid the clerk €10 and motioned for me to follow suit. I gave the man my money, he handed me a key, and then reached under his desk and clicked a button. A door in the back of the room buzzed open and my guide walked through, signaling me to follow. I was completely baffled and getting pretty stressed at this point. All I could see was a corridor of orange lockers and benches. He stripped down and tossed his clothes in a locker. I looked at my key and found the corresponding number, opened it up to find a towel inside with an unopened condom perched on top. It was a bathhouse. Not like a spa, but a place where people met up discreetly. Being a small-town 20-year-old, I had no idea what to do or say, let alone being stuck with a guide I could not communicate with. Basically, I wandered around and tried to make the best of it, while the man went and enjoyed the place all night meeting others. Several men made intense eye contact with me. A few approached me, but left when I responded helplessly in English. I tried to relax in the sauna, but it was hard to relax when it smelled strange, and I kept hearing noises all around me, but could not quite see where it was coming from. When my guide was finally done having his fun, he took me back to my hosts. It was like 3 in the morning, and they were all asleep. So I told them all about it the next morning, and they laughed at me like it was hilarious. I lightened up a bit, realizing I technically was not in real danger, did not get robbed or anything, and being older now, I could have coped with that and held my own. But springing that on a naive 20-year-old traveler who could not communicate struck me as being very inconsiderate. Story 27, I am from England, and my wife, who is American, got us tickets to a show in Chicago shortly after I moved to the United States. So we took a train to Chicago, took a taxi to the museum, and had a great day. Then we decided to try and walk back to downtown. It was 107 degrees and we only made it about 2 miles before we gave up. So we tried to get a taxi but could not seem to find any. We walked across to where we saw some shops and went into a game store to enjoy their air conditioning for a few minutes while we figured out where we were. When we walked inside, an announcement said, "Attention, the store is under electronic surveillance for your safety." So there was that. We cooled down and then headed to the subway in the distance for a drink. But as we were walking, we passed a group of 4 people. 2 men and 2 women. One man clearly had a gun, and I am pretty sure they were in a group involved in crime. We walked past them and I was worried I was about to be robbed. I had an overnight bag with various electronics, so I tried not to show how I felt. Once they were about 15 feet past us, I heard one of the women say, "Just let them keep going," or something similar. I almost panicked and we hurried toward the subway. It was boarded up and covered in graffiti, so we dashed to a tiny food mart across the street and asked them to call a taxi to come get us. They said taxis would not come to that side of town, so I thought, this is how I die. While considering our options, one of the managers said he was about to get off work and he would gladly take us into downtown. So against all my survival instincts, we reluctantly agreed with polite faces and headed out of the building with him. We left the parking lot and crossed the street. I was again worried where we were going, but then he said he had to park down there because someone had gotten hurt there that morning, and where he normally parked was blocked off by crime scene tape. But after all the fear and panicking I did, we made it back to town and we got home safe and sound. And I will never go to the south side of Chicago again, and I will always take my own car. Story 28, went to Jamaica with my now ex-boyfriend for his friend's wedding. My boyfriend had not traveled much but still insisted on booking everything. The others were not interested in doing anything other than relaxing on the beach, so we planned to do one day with just ourselves exploring. The hotel staff told us repeatedly to never take a private taxi, so he assured me he would book from a legitimate company. The day comes for my boyfriend and I to explore, and an unmarked taxi shows up. I ask if this is a private one, and he tells me it is probably a good company. I reluctantly get in. The driver is quiet and keeps looking back and coughing. On an empty dirt road, he pulls over and tells us to get out. There are 2 men on the side of the road holding machetes. I am thinking, this is where we die. They are both yelling at the driver and gesturing wildly with the machetes. One holds his machete to my boyfriend, gesturing for him to follow him into a hut. I am terrified. After the longest minute ever, both emerge with an armful of coconuts. One man grabs the coconut and brings the machete down on it. He then puts a straw and tiny parasol in it and hands it to the coughing driver, who thanks him and starts drinking it. Then they get 2 more for us, and suddenly everyone is laughing and smiling. After a few minutes, the driver tells us it is time to go, but to tip the men. My boyfriend gets out a $5 bill. I stop him and give them a 20, thank them, and get in the van. The driver proceeded to take us on a lovely adventure where no one gets harmed. I ended the relationship on the last day. Story 29, I was in Berlin, traveling alone, and it was late. I was walking back to my hotel and a huge native German bodybuilder type man runs up out of nowhere and tries to keep pace with me. I had headphones in and was walking fast, but he kept up and repeatedly tried to get my attention, even though I was trying to ignore him. I took out my earbuds and asked him what was going on, and he smiles, tries to charm me, asks me where I'm going, asks if he can walk with me. I am repeatedly shutting him down, refusing all of his requests to take me out for a drink, saying no thanks, have a great night, sorry I have a boyfriend, and similar things. Suddenly, out of nowhere, his frustration with all my refusals builds up, and he grabs me, all 5 feet 1 inch of me, lifts me over his shoulder like a caveman, and takes off with me. He runs with me over his shoulder, hanging upside down along his back, and I am shouting at him to put me down. After what felt like 1,000 feet of me kicking and flailing, I realize this man is too strong, and he is not going to put me down. We are in the historic downtown area of Berlin, so it is completely empty and silent. I am screaming for help and no one can hear me, so I start biting the back of his arm and shoulder, and that gets him to throw me off onto the ground, shout insults at me, call me names, and stalk off. In retrospect, I am pretty sure he was amped on some kind of substance and intended to assault me. I walked back to my hotel in complete shock. I do not travel alone anymore. Story 30. In New Zealand, my friends and I were driving our camper van toward Wellington on the south tip of the North Island. It was probably about 1 or 2 in the morning, so we were alone on the road for a while. We stopped at a nice view of some hills across a valley, which looked beautiful in the moonlight. Between the road and the hills was a steep drop-off. We looked down and saw a mattress and some other junk which looked like it had been tossed down there. As we were taking in the view, we heard something rustling in the bushes below. We thought it was an animal at first, but it sounded distinctly like big, powerful footsteps. It seemed to be going along the bottom of the steep edge toward where it was not so steep, and it could climb up. We got in the van and drove away quickly. Next, we stopped at a campsite. We saw other camper vans and tents already set up and people asleep. We had stopped at places like this before, and a lot of them had drop boxes to pay for the spot where you park your van. We found a central building, but the door was ajar. Strange, but whatever. Someone forgot to close the door. Things got stranger as we looked around and found food in pots and pans still sitting on the stove, covered in bugs. It was like people had just vanished or left in a hurry. We went back to the van, having not found a drop box, and took out the map to find where we should go next. This place was giving us the creeps, so we wanted to find somewhere else. As we were looking at the map, I looked up and noticed the lights were starting to get covered in bugs, like hundreds. We also noticed they were starting to swarm us. We ran around, brushing them off, and ran back into the van where we took off as fast as we could. To this day, I believe some strange bug infestation drove everyone away from that camp, and we were almost next. Story 31. This did not happen to me abroad, but I will just start off by saying that I am still banned from a small town in Tennessee. To make an extremely long story short, a few friends and I set off on a rescue mission for one of our best friends. This happened more than 10 years ago, and it was still one of the scariest things to ever happen to me. We drove to this town and arrived around 4 in the morning and started watching a small motel where our friend was. She had gotten involved in one of those door-to-door magazine sales rackets, and we were told from a couple of insiders what was actually going on. They would send young people out to walk miles and sell magazines, and the problem was this traveling company would take everyone's phones, wallets, money, and everything. So all they had was their folder and a writing tool. At some point, this company would ditch people and take all of their belongings, leaving them in the middle of nowhere alone with no money or phone or anything. It was almost like a cult while on the inside as well. We arrive at this place, you start waiting, and when the sun rises, we get surrounded on all sides by people in a truck. We called the police and they arrive, and at this point, it is a standoff between us and this magazine group. Our friend who was there was crying uncontrollably and out of fear decided to stay. The police told us to leave, so we left. We spent the rest of the day attempting to get our friend to sneak out and come with us, but we were met with resistance every time. The police kept showing up, and they kept getting angrier and angrier each time. It eventually got to the point where we were being chased around this town by these magazine people carrying weapons. We called the police again. They showed up, got very angry, and wrote out something banning us from this town. They told us to leave, and if we were seen or heard from again that day, we would go straight to jail. This was when things got intense. We sped off and were still being followed by 4 cars from the magazine group. We tried to lose them through town and could not, so we got on the interstate to lose them. They followed us for around 30 minutes before I just drove aggressively and started weaving in and out of traffic and merging onto different highways, and eventually we could not see them behind us anymore. We exited the highway and sat at this tiny little truck stop planning our next move. In the end, I drove back with one friend, while the other 2 stayed and eventually caught a plane back to where we lived. If I went to this town now, I'm sure no one would notice or care, including the police. But technically, I am officially banned from a town in Tennessee.